Mary sat on the edge of her worn-out sofa, staring at the photo frame she had dusted 1,000 times before. In the picture, a much younger version of herself smiled beside a small boy, her son, Daniel, his eyes bright with joy and innocence. That photo was taken at the park on a sunny afternoon when Daniel had just learned how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. It was one of the best days of her life, a memory she clung to during lonely nights and difficult years. She had raised him all by herself, from his first steps to his first day of school, from scraped knees to late-night fevers. Daniel's father had walked out when he was just a baby, and Mary had promised herself she would never let her son feel unloved. She worked double shifts, missed sleep, skipped meals, anything to make sure he had everything he needed. She never remarried, never even dated seriously, because Daniel had always been her world. Every school event, every parent-teacher meeting, every birthday party, she was there, cheering the loudest and loving the hardest. Now, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever, as if the walls remembered the laughter that had once echoed between them. Daniel had grown into a fine young man, smart, respectful, and kind. At least that's how she had always seen him. He had gone to college on a scholarship, the first in their family to do so, and Mary had cried tears of pride the day he graduated. When he introduced her to Jasmine, his girlfriend, Mary had welcomed her with open arms and a warm heart. Jasmine had seemed sweet at first, polite and eager to get along, and Mary had hoped this girl would love Daniel as much as she had. But over time, Mary noticed small changes, fewer phone calls, shorter visits, and a new distance in Daniel's voice. At first, she blamed it on their busy lives, assuming they were just adjusting to marriage and adulthood. But soon, the excuses began to sound too rehearsed, too practiced, like they were covering up something deeper. One day, after weeks of not hearing from him, Mary decided to visit their apartment unannounced, her heart filled with concern. She brought a homemade casserole, just like the ones Daniel used to love when he was little. When Jasmine opened the door, she looked surprised, not happy, and hesitated before letting Mary in. The apartment felt cold, not in temperature but in spirit, and Mary could sense she wasn't really welcome. Daniel wasn't home, and Jasmine didn't offer much conversation, just polite small talk and quick glances at the clock. Mary placed the casserole in the fridge and tried to start a meaningful conversation, but Jasmine kept the interaction short. "I think it's best if you call before dropping by next time," Jasmine said, her voice firm but not rude. Mary nodded, masking her hurt with a weak smile, and left shortly after, her heart heavier than when she arrived. That night, Daniel called her, his tone distant, explaining that Jasmine felt overwhelmed and needed space. Mary listened quietly, biting her tongue, not wanting to create tension, but her heart ached with confusion. She had never asked for much, just a place in their lives, a seat at the table she had helped build. Days turned into weeks, and Mary's calls often went unanswered or were returned with brief, distracted conversations. The holidays came, and instead of the usual family dinner, Daniel told her they'd be spending it with Jasmine's parents. Mary decorated her small house anyway, baking cookies and setting the table for one, pretending not to care. She wrapped a gift for Daniel, a handmade photo album filled with memories from his childhood. But he didn't come by to pick it up, and it stayed under the tree, unopened, like her heart. Every corner of the house reminded her of him, the growth chart on the doorframe, the drawing on the fridge, the books in his old room. She tried to stay busy, volunteering at the community center and joining a local book club. But nothing filled the emptiness of being pushed aside by the one person she had sacrificed everything for. One Sunday afternoon, she received a message from Daniel. "Hey Mom, Jasmine and I talked. We think it's best you give us some space for now." The words were simple, but they shattered something inside her that she hadn't realized could still break. She stared at the screen for a long time, her hands trembling, then simply replied, "Okay, I understand." And as the phone slipped from her hand onto the couch, Mary sat in silence, surrounded by the echoes of a life once filled with love. The next morning, Mary sat by the window with her hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, watching the rain tap gently against the glass. The soft gray sky mirrored the heaviness she felt inside, as if the weather itself shared her sorrow. She hadn't slept much the night before, her mind replaying Daniel's message over and over like a scratched record. The words "give us some space" felt like a polite version of "we don't want you around." She thought about all the times she had held Daniel when he cried, stayed up with him when he was sick, and celebrated his every milestone with more pride than anyone else ever could. Now it felt like she was being erased from the picture, like a bookmark removed from a story she helped write. She wiped a tear from her cheek and tried to distract herself by organizing the bookshelf in the living room. As she dusted the old spines of her favorite novels, her fingers paused on a small photo tucked between two books. It was Daniel's kindergarten graduation picture. His toothy grin and crooked cap instantly brought tears to her eyes. That day, he had run straight into her arms after receiving his certificate, shouting, "We did it, Mommy." She remembered carrying him home on her shoulders, even though he was getting too big, just because he asked. How could that same boy grow into a man who now acted like she was a burden? She didn't want to blame Jasmine, but deep down, she wondered if things would be different without her influence. Maybe Jasmine saw Mary as overbearing, or maybe she simply wanted Daniel to herself. Either way, it didn't change the ache that was spreading through Mary's chest like a quiet storm. She tried calling Daniel again that afternoon, hoping to clarify things, but the call went to voicemail. Her voice cracked as she left a message. "Just wanted to hear your voice, sweetheart. I miss you." She spent the rest of the day cleaning every corner of the house, scrubbing as if it could wash away the sadness. She rearranged the living room, polished the floors, and even cleaned the attic she hadn't touched in years. There, she found an old box filled with Daniel's childhood memories, drawings, report cards, birthday cards he made just for her. She sat on the attic floor, surrounded by faded construction paper and dried macaroni glued to hearts. One card read, "You're the best mom in the universe," in big, wobbly letters. She pressed it to her chest, holding it like a fragile piece of her broken heart. For hours, she stayed up there, flipping through time, clinging to what was and fearing what was becoming. The ache inside her wasn't just about missing Daniel. It was about not knowing where she fit anymore. She had always believed that when Daniel grew up, they would remain close, that all their sacrifices and shared moments would build an unbreakable bond. But bonds, she was learning, can loosen quietly, without a sound, until they no longer hold. That evening, she received a text from an unknown number. It was, "Jasmine, please respect our space. Daniel needs time to focus on our marriage. We hope you understand." The words felt final, like a door slowly closing while she stood on the outside, knocking with no answer. Mary didn't reply, unsure what she could say that wouldn't make things worse. Instead, she placed her phone on the table and stared at it until the screen dimmed to black. The silence in the room deepened, growing louder than any conversation ever could. She stood and walked to Daniel's old room, which she had kept exactly the same, even though he hadn't lived there in years. The posters were still on the wall, the trophies still on the shelf, and his favorite blanket still folded neatly at the end of the bed. She lay down on the bed, clutching the blanket, breathing in what little scent of him still remained. Her tears soaked into the pillow as she whispered, "I did everything for you." The room, filled with memories, gave no reply, only silence and the hum of time moving forward without her. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside her had only just begun. And as night fell over the quiet house, Mary realized she was grieving a loss that hadn't even been given a name. The following week, Mary forced herself to go outside, hoping that fresh air might lift the weight that sat heavy on her chest. She visited the local market where she used to take Daniel every Saturday when he was little. The fruit stand owner, Mr. Patel, smiled warmly and asked, "How's your boy doing these days?" Mary hesitated, her smile faltering for a moment, then replied softly, "He's busy with married life now." She picked out some apples, Daniel's favorite, then paused, realizing he probably wouldn't be stopping by to eat them. Still, she bought them anyway, placing them gently into her basket like old habits she didn't know how to break. She walked past the toy shop where she once bought Daniel a red kite that got caught in the big oak tree near the park. Her heart clenched as she remembered how he had cried until she climbed the tree herself to get back. She had always gone the extra mile for him, even when no one else saw, even when she was exhausted and alone. Returning home, Mary placed the apples in the fruit bowl and stared at them, imagining Daniel walking in and grabbing one like he used to. But the front door stayed closed, and the silence around her answered all her hopes. That evening, she sat with her scrapbook, a collection of pictures and notes that told the story of her journey as a mother. One page held a handprint Daniel made in preschool, the paint smudged but still bright. Another page had a note he wrote in 3rd grade. "When I grow up, I want to take care of my mom just like she takes care of me." She read it over and over, tears dripping onto the page until the ink blurred slightly. Was that boy still somewhere inside the man who now chose silence over love? She wanted to believe he was, that the bond they had was just temporarily lost, not gone forever. But doubt crept in like shadows at sunset long and quiet, wrapping around her thoughts. Later that week, she received a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, but the familiar looped writing made her breath catch. It was from Daniel. The letter began, "Mom, I need you to understand that things are different now." He explained that Jasmine didn't feel comfortable with Mary being too involved in their lives, especially unannounced visits or frequent calls. "It's not that I don't love you," he wrote, "but I need to set boundaries now that I'm building a family with her." Mary stared at the words boundaries and building a family, as if they were bricks being laid to build a wall between them. He mentioned that they were considering moving to another city for job opportunities, somewhere farther away. Mary's hands trembled as she read, knowing that this move would mean fewer visits, if any at all. He ended the letter with, "I'll always be your son, but I have to put my marriage first." Those words were like a dagger wrapped in a ribbon, kind but cutting, final in tone. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in the scrapbook, right beside the handprint and the third-grade note. That night, she sat in her kitchen for hours, the overhead light buzzing faintly, her tea untouched and cold. She didn't cry this time. There were no more tears left, only a quiet ache that settled in her bones. She thought of all the dreams she had for her future, and how none of them included being alone in her old age. She had always imagined holidays filled with laughter, grandkids running through the house, stories shared around a table. But now her world felt small, reduced to memories, unanswered calls, and fruit that never got eaten. The next morning, she woke up and stared at the ceiling for a long time before getting out of bed. She realized she couldn't keep waiting for someone who might never come back in the same way. So she dressed, packed a small bag, and took the bus to a nearby town where no one knew her. She checked into a cozy inn by the lake and spent the weekend reading, walking, and letting herself breathe without expectation. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't check her phone every hour, waiting for Daniel's name to appear. She was still broken, still healing, but in that quiet place by the water, Mary remembered who she was before the silence. When Mary returned home from the lake, something in her had shifted, just slightly, but enough to feel it. The walls of her house still echoed with silence, but now it felt less like loneliness and more like space to think. She began spending her mornings in the garden again, trimming roses and pulling weeds, letting the sun kiss her skin. Her neighbor, Mrs. Green, who often watched her from her porch, finally came over with a warm pie and a soft smile. "I've been meaning to say hello," she said, placing the pie on the kitchen counter. "You look like you could use some company." Mary appreciated the gesture, grateful for a voice that wasn't coming from a memory or the past. Over slices of apple pie and steaming cups of tea, they talked about books, recipes, and the changing seasons. Mrs. Green didn't ask about Daniel, and Mary didn't bring him up. It was a silent agreement wrapped in kindness. The visit reminded Mary that life could still hold moments of warmth, even if they came from unexpected places. She started volunteering at the local library 2 days a week, organizing shelves and reading to children during story hour. The kids giggled when she made silly voices for each character, their laughter stirring something in her heart she hadn't felt in weeks. One little girl named Sophie clung to her after every story, calling her Miss Mary and asking if she could read one more book. Mary began looking forward to those afternoons, where pages turned into bridges connecting her to joy again. Though her heart still ached for Daniel, these moments reminded her she was still needed, still valued. On a sunny Thursday, she bumped into Jasmine's mother at the grocery store. The woman gave her a tight-lipped smile and said, "I hope you're respecting their space. It's important for them to grow as a couple." Mary nodded politely but walked away quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her shopping list. Those words echoed in her mind all the way home, respecting their space. It felt like everyone had agreed she was no longer welcome, as if her role had expired without notice. That night, Mary took out her old journal and wrote for hours, pouring her feelings onto the pages she once used to track Daniel's milestones. "I don't know how to stop being a mother," she wrote. "I don't know how to unlove someone I raised with my whole soul." The next day, she mailed a small package to Daniel, a framed photo of the two of them on his 5th birthday, laughing as he smashed cake into her face. She didn't include a note, just the photo, hoping the memory would speak louder than any words could. Days passed with no reply, but she kept herself busy, watering plants, calling old friends, baking pies for neighbors. People in the community started noticing her more, greeting her with warmth and kindness that wrapped around her like a shawl. She joined a book club, attended Sunday markets, and even started teaching a baking class at the local community center. The more she gave to others, the more pieces of herself returned. One evening, while organizing old files, she found a sealed envelope Daniel had written years ago as part of a school project titled Letters to Our Future Selves. She opened it with trembling fingers and read, "I hope I always remember that my mom is the reason I'm strong. She is my hero." The words struck her like lightning, sudden and powerful, awakening a river of emotion that had been dammed for too long. She sat with the letter in her lap, unsure whether to feel comforted or heartbroken by how far they drifted. The next morning, Mary decided to write one final letter, not to Daniel, but to herself. She thanked herself for being brave, for loving unconditionally, and for surviving heartache that would have broken many others. She wrote, "You are still worthy, even if you're not invited. You are still loved, even if it's not spoken." That letter stayed on her dresser, a reminder that her value wasn't determined by who showed up, but by who she had always been. She didn't know if Daniel would ever come around, but she knew she couldn't keep waiting in the shadows of what used to be. So she lit a candle, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I release you with love, my son." And as the flame flickered and danced, Mary felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. It was fragile and quiet, but it was hers, and that made it enough for now. Weeks passed slowly, like raindrops crawling down a window pane, and Mary started to wonder if Daniel had simply decided to leave her behind without saying it outright. She tried not to think that way, but each day that came without a phone call or visit made it harder to believe otherwise. Her heart had carried him through scraped knees, late-night fevers, and long hours of studying at the kitchen table. How could it be so easy for him to forget all that? One morning, as she watered the plants in her tiny front yard, the neighbor waved and asked if her son was coming for Easter. Mary hesitated, then smiled softly and said, "Maybe," even though she already knew the answer. She baked a carrot cake just in case, the same kind Daniel had always loved since he was little, the one he used to beg for every year. She placed it on the kitchen counter and watched the clock, her eyes drifting toward the driveway every time a car passed. Evening came and went, and the cake remained untouched, the house untouched, her heart untouched by the one she had raised with every ounce of strength she had. The next day, she carefully wrapped the cake and placed it in the freezer, whispering, "Maybe next year." That night, Mary sat by her small fireplace and opened one of the letters she had written but never sent. It was dated 6 months ago, and the words on the page felt like they came from a different version of herself, one still hopeful, still believing. The letter talked about how proud she was of Daniel, how happy she was that he had found someone he loved, and how she missed the sound of his laughter in her home. She had ended it with, "You'll always have a place here, no matter what." Mary held the paper to her chest and closed her eyes, remembering the night she first held Daniel in the hospital. He had been so tiny, wrapped in a blue blanket, his eyes blinking slowly as he reached for her finger. She had whispered promises then, promises to protect him, to give him everything she had, even when there was nothing left for herself. She thought about how he used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't let the lightning get me." She remembered how they danced around the living room to the radio on Saturdays, laughing until their stomachs hurt. All those memories lived in her like photographs burned into her heart, but she wondered if they lived in his. She got up and walked to the hall closet, opening a box filled with old keepsakes, tiny shoes, baby teeth in a glass jar, finger paintings signed with a backwards D. Each item felt like a treasure, a piece of the puzzle that made her life feel whole. She pulled out an old recorder and pressed play, hearing Daniel's 4-year-old voice sing a song they made up together about dinosaurs and cookies. The sound was crackly, but to Mary, it was music sweeter than any choir. She sat on the floor and let the tears come, not from pain but from love that had nowhere left to go. Later that week, she decided to go through her things and organize them, even if no one else ever cared to see them. She labeled photo albums, wrote small notes on the back of each picture, and put his baby blanket into a sealed bag to protect it. She wasn't doing it because she had given up. She was doing it because she knew that someday someone might wonder who Mary was and how much she had loved her son. She still believed that love mattered, even if it was invisible now. She still believed that kindness echoed louder than silence, even if it came back to her in whispers. A few days later, a neighbor came by with a pie and said, "You raised a good man, Mary. Everyone in town knows it." Mary smiled and thanked her, even though those words felt like a small bandage on a much bigger wound. She wondered how people saw Daniel now, successful, professional, married, but never knew about the woman who stayed up all night sewing his school costumes or reading him bedtime stories twice. She didn't need a trophy or praise. She just wanted to be remembered. not as an afterthought or a shadow from the past, but as a mother who gave everything and asked for nothing. That night, she lit a candle in the window, the way she used to do when Daniel was late from school. It was a quiet signal, a symbol of home waiting, of warmth untouched by time or distance. The flame flickered gently in the dark, and she watched it with eyes full of hope and history. Maybe one day, she whispered, he'll see the light and come home, not just to the house, but to me. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, her heart ached not for what she had lost, but for what she still hoped could be found. And even in the silence, Mary knew her love was still alive, even if no one else could see it burning. A few months later, as spring blossomed, the silence was finally broken by a text from Daniel. "Mom, we need to talk." The words seemed cold, sharp, even, and Mary's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what kind of talk this would be. She immediately thought of all the things that had gone wrong, but she pushed those thoughts aside, telling herself to stay calm. She replied quickly, "Of course, sweetheart." When would be a good time? Daniel's response was short. "How about tomorrow? Jasmine and I are coming by." A wave of nervousness washed over her as she set the phone down and tried to focus on anything but the unknown that lay ahead. She spent the rest of the evening cleaning, as she often did when she felt anxious, scrubbing counters and folding laundry with a mechanical motion. Her thoughts kept circling back to her son, her sweet, thoughtful boy, who used to tell her everything, who used to need her. Now he was a man, married, and had his own life, one that she couldn't seem to find a place in. The next day, Daniel and Jasmine arrived, and Mary tried to greet them with a smile, though her insides were twisted in knots. Jasmine entered first, her expression neutral, and Daniel followed, looking tired but giving her a warm hug. "Hey, Mom," Daniel said, his voice softer than usual, as if he wasn't sure what to say next. They sat down on the couch together, and Jasmine immediately took a seat across from Mary, her gaze steady and unblinking. The room was quiet for a long moment, and Mary couldn't help but feel the distance between them, the weight of all the unsaid words. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice hesitant but firm. "Mom, Jasmine, and I need to set some boundaries." The words hit Mary like a punch, and her breath caught in her chest, but she forced herself to listen. "We appreciate everything you've done for us," he continued, "but it feels like things are getting a little overwhelming. We need some space to figure out our own life together." Jasmine nodded in agreement, her arms folded across her chest. "We're just trying to establish our own family, and sometimes it feels like there's a lot of pressure from you." Mary stared at them, her mind racing, but she couldn't find the words to respond, not at first. She had spent so much of her life giving everything to Daniel, and now it felt like she was being pushed out of the life they had shared. She looked at her son, this grown man who was once so small, so dependent on her, and tried to find the boy she had raised. She remembered the late-night talks, the countless hours spent comforting him after bad dreams, and the way he used to hold her hand when he was scared. "I don't want to pressure you," Mary said finally, her voice shaky but steady, "but I just want to be a part of your life. I want to be a part of this family, too." She felt a lump form in her throat as she spoke, her heart aching with the weight of everything unsaid. Daniel shifted in his seat, avoiding her gaze, and Jasmine's eyes flickered to the floor, as if they were both uncomfortable with the truth hanging in the air. "We know, Mom," Daniel said quietly. "We know you love us, but sometimes it's hard to balance everything. We're just asking for a little more space," Jasmine added, her voice a little softer than before. Mary nodded slowly, though every fiber of her being screamed to argue, to fight for a place in their lives. But she didn't, because she loved Daniel too much to push him further away. "I understand," she whispered, the words tasting like defeat. The silence between them grew thick, and for the first time, Mary felt like a stranger in her own home. "We're not saying you're not welcome," Daniel added quickly, as if trying to soften the blow. "Just that we need to find our own rhythm." Mary forced a smile, though it felt brittle, as if the cracks in her heart might show through. "I understand," she repeated, though she wasn't sure she did. Jasmine stood up, her eyes no longer cold but distant, as if she, too, was trying to find a way to make peace without truly understanding the hurt she had caused. "We'll go now," she said, her voice softer, but the distance between them had already been created. Mary watched them leave, Daniel giving her one last hug before stepping out the door with Jasmine beside him. As the door clicked shut behind them, Mary stood motionless for a moment, her heart heavy with loss. She hadn't raised her son to be unkind, but it seemed as though the more she gave, the further away he drifted. And as the house grew quiet once more, Mary sat down at the kitchen table, holding her hands tightly in her lap, wondering how she had ended up here on the outside looking in. Days passed, each one a little harder than the last, as Mary tried to find some way to move forward. But the weight of her son's absence lingered like an unspoken truth. The quiet was unbearable at times, especially when she looked at the things they had shared, the toys he had left behind, the photographs of his childhood, the pieces of a life she had built for them both. Mary found herself wandering the house at night, unable to sleep, her thoughts racing with what she could have done differently. She had tried so hard to be everything for Daniel, to give him a future full of opportunity, love, and support. But somewhere along the way, she had lost him, not just physically, but emotionally, as he created a new life for himself. One evening, she received a call from her old friend Martha, who had been a constant in her life since Daniel was young. "How are you doing, Mary?" Martha asked, her voice filled with concern. Mary hesitated before answering, unsure of how to explain the emptiness she felt. Okay," she replied softly. "It's just been hard." Martha didn't press her, but Mary could hear the sympathy in her voice. "I know you miss him, but don't give up hope. He'll come around." "I don't know," Mary whispered, staring out the window at the dark sky. "It feels like I'm losing him forever." Martha paused before speaking again. "You've always been a great mother, Mary. That hasn't changed. But sometimes, even the best of us need a little space to grow." Mary let the words sink in. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You've got to take care of yourself, too," Martha added. "Don't forget that." Mary smiled faintly, feeling the weight of her friend's words, even though they didn't make the pain go away. After the call ended, Mary sat in the silence of her living room, staring at the old family photos on the wall. She thought about the moments that had once filled this house with laughter and love, and now it felt like the laughter was a distant memory. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine Daniel walking through the door, coming home as he used to. But when she opened her eyes, the space was empty, and the silence was deafening. For a long time, Mary had lived her life through her role as a mother, but now with Daniel gone, she was left to figure out who she was outside of that. She had always poured everything into her family, and now that they were building their own lives, she was left with nothing but time. As the days wore on, Mary found herself looking for small distractions, books, puzzles, even old movies she had watched 1,000 times. But nothing seemed to fill the hole inside her, the emptiness that had settled in her chest like a weight she couldn't escape. She knew she had to find a way to heal, but she wasn't sure how. Sometimes she thought about moving away, starting fresh somewhere else, but then she would remember that this house was the only home she had ever known. It was the place where she had raised Daniel, where she had poured her heart and soul into every corner of their life. How could she leave that behind? How could she walk away from everything she had built, even if it no longer felt like home? One afternoon, Mary went through her kitchen drawers, searching for something to occupy her mind. She pulled out a stack of old letters, ones she had written to Daniel over the years, filled with advice, love, and sometimes just a simple "I miss you." She had always written to him when he was away, a way to keep her connection to him alive, even when he was too busy to call. As she read through the letters, her eyes welled with tears. The words she had written felt so full of hope, but they also felt like a lifetime ago. "I miss you, my sweet boy," she whispered to herself, folding the letter back up and putting it aside. She couldn't stop the tears from falling, but this time they felt like a release, a way to let go of the tight grip she had on the past. Later that evening, Mary decided to write Daniel another letter, though she wasn't sure if she would ever send it. She took out a clean sheet of paper and began to write, pouring all of her feelings onto the page. "I don't know where things went wrong, but I miss you so much, Daniel. I miss the boy who would sit on my lap and tell me his dreams. I miss the way you laughed when I tried to teach you how to bake cookies. I miss the way you held my hand when you were scared. I don't want to pressure you or make things harder. I just want you to know that I will always love you. No matter what happens, you are my son. I hope you find happiness, and I hope you never forget the love we shared." She folded the letter and placed it in the drawer, unsure if she would ever send it. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a small sense of peace. Mary knew that no matter what, her love for Daniel would never fade, and that was something no distance could take away. Weeks passed, and slowly, Mary began to find her own way again, despite the ache that still lingered deep within her heart. She took up painting, something she had loved before motherhood took center stage, and it helped to fill the empty spaces inside her. The brush in her hand felt familiar, and the colors on the canvas spoke to her in a way words never could. She painted landscapes of places she had always dreamed of visiting, places where she could find peace away from the weight of the world. Each stroke was an attempt to create something beautiful, something lasting, even though she knew the canvas couldn't fill the hole Daniel had left. One afternoon, as she was working on a painting of a quiet lake at sunset, the doorbell rang. Mary stood still for a moment, unsure whether to answer, but something inside told her to open the door. When she did, she found Daniel standing there, his face uncertain but sincere. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, his voice tinged with guilt. Mary's heart skipped, but she didn't know what to say. The time between them felt vast, like a chasm that couldn't be crossed with simple words. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Can we talk?" Mary nodded, stepping aside to let him in, her mind racing with all the possibilities of what he might say. They sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between them both awkward and heavy. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about," Daniel began, his voice quiet, but full of emotion. Mary felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't speak. She just waited, hoping for something that would bridge the gap between them. "I know I've been distant," Daniel continued, "and I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until I took a step back and looked at everything." Mary nodded, her eyes filling with unshed tears, but she still didn't speak. Daniel reached out, his hand hovering over hers, unsure if she would allow the gesture. After a long moment, she took his hand, and the touch felt like a spark of warmth she had been craving for months. "I've been so focused on Jasmine and our life together," he said, his voice cracking, "that I forgot about the most important thing, how much you've done for me, how much you've always been there." Mary squeezed his hand, trying not to let the tears fall, but she couldn't help it. "I've been selfish, Mom," Daniel said, his voice thick with regret. "I thought I was doing what was best for us, but I was wrong." She shook her head, her heart swelling with a mix of pain and relief. "You were just trying to build your own life, Daniel. I understand that, but I've hurt you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And that's not okay." Mary looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she saw the boy she had raised, the one who still cared, still loved. "I just want you to be happy," she said softly. "But I also want you to remember that no matter what, I'll always be here for you." Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have come sooner." The words felt like a balm, healing the wounds that had festered for so long. But Mary knew that forgiveness didn't mean everything would be perfect right away. It was a step, though, and that was enough for now. After a long, quiet pause, Daniel finally spoke again. "I want to make it right, Mom. I want us to be close again." Mary smiled, a gentle but genuine smile. "We will, Daniel. We just need time." "I know," he said, his voice steady now, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. They sat together for a while longer, not needing to say much, just savoring the moment of connection that had been missing for so long. Finally, Daniel stood up, and for the first time in months, Mary felt the warmth of a hug that wasn't filled with tension or distance. As he pulled away, he looked at her with a soft smile. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, Daniel," Mary replied, her heart full. He gave her one last look before stepping toward the door, but before he left, he turned back to her. "I'll be in touch more," he promised, his voice firm. "And I'll make sure Jasmine knows how important you are to me." Mary nodded, watching him leave, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was still carrying. As she closed the door behind him, she stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt hopeful.